Welcome to project planning and control. So we're going to look at the network diagrams. We're going to look at what PET is and what CPM is. So to start with, we can start by understanding what a network diagram is. So a network diagram, basically, we are talking about a graphical representation of the activities that a project will have in their sequence, and also how they must be performed in project management. So the main aim is to schedule tasks, identify dependent tasks, to identify the critical path, and also it's very important to allocate resources effectively. So there are two models that we're going to look at. Basically, we're going to look at what is called the PET, which is a program evaluation review technique, and CPM, which is a critical path model. So some of the terminologies that we're going to use that I need you to acquaint yourself with, I'll be using terms like an activity, an event, a node. Okay, so what do these terminologies mean? So when I'm talking about an activity, basically, this is a task or set of tasks that have to be done. That is what we call an activity. Okay. And when I talk about an event, basically, an event, I mean, in the context of our study. So firstly, before I talk about the events, the activities, I said this is a specific piece of work or task that must be carried out in the project. It will take account of time, it will take account of resources, and also the deliverables. So in a network diagram, we're looking at activities that are represented by arrows. So we'll look at it in terms of arrow, activity on arrow, and activity on node. So these are usually used when we are designing a website, when we are laying a foundation for a house, when we are writing a report. So I'll get to make mention of activities that have predecessors and successors. So when you talk about a predecessor, we're talking about an activity that must be completed before another begins. Then when we're talking about successors, we're looking at activities that depend on the current activity. Then we also have an event. So what we mean when we talk about an event is simply the start or end of an activity. The start or end of an activity. So when you're looking at an event, it can also be known as a node. It marks the start or an end of an activity. So events don't usually consume time or resources. They are simply indicating the transition between activities. So we are going to look at activity on arrow, A on A diagrams. These are represented by what? Circles or boxes, if you may like. We also have a start event, which talks about the beginning of a project, and the end, which talks about the completion of a project or a task. So other terminologies that I'm going to use is what we call a dummy activity. So a dummy activity will show dependencies without actual work. So a dummy activity is simply an activity that we use in PET charts, especially when you're dealing with activity on arrow. So mainly they're used to maintain logical relationships between activities. So they represent dependencies without consuming time or resources. Okay, so we're also going to look at a critical path, which is the longest period. It's the longest path in the diagram. So it determines the shortest time in which a project can be completed. So we're going to use that terminology, which is called the critical path. So this is the longest path through which the network diagram will pass. All right. So it will determine the minimum time that will be required to complete the task. So any delay in the critical path will directly affect the project's completion time. So activities in the path that have a zero path or slack will be shown. Then finally, but not the least, what we call the slack or float. When we're talking about the slack, we're talking about the time an activity can be delayed without delaying the overall project. So there are two types of slacks that we have. There's a total float or slack. It's the same thing. It's a time an activity can be delayed without affecting the entire project. We have what we call a free float. It's simply the time an activity can be delayed without affecting the start of the activity. For instance, if you have an activity that has a total float of 3 days, it can start 3 days late without practically impacting the project. So slack times, they help us in understand key things in how to prioritize activities. So I'm going to take you through an exam question here, where we want to look at how to come up with a pet diagram. So you can see here, without looking at this side here, I want it to be as basic as I can so that you understand how to draw pet. So what you're seeing here, you have an activity ID, the predecessor. So when you're drawing a diagram, to simplify your terminology, you know that where there's a dash, okay, or projects that have a dash are just showing you where the project will start from. Okay, so I'll look at I'll show you how to draw these projects. So here, meaning the project will start from A and B. There's some. Okay, so now we're looking at activities. So meaning these activities will start from A and B. Okay, so A and B are the start. Okay, so here is A and here is B. So meaning from B, it goes to where? C. From B, it goes where? To C. Then from A, it goes where? To D. From A, it goes where? To D. Okay. Then from A and C, it goes to where? E. From A and C, it goes where? A, C, goes where? E. Okay. Then from B, it goes where? From B, it goes where? F. Finally, from E and F, it goes where? To G. So this is how we draw. So there's what we call a split activity, and a split activity is coming from one activity, it's splitting. And there's what we call a merge activity. So a merge activity is where they are meeting. Okay, so I want you to understand how to draw it.
You were breaking.
I was breaking. Can you hear me now? Can you get me now? Can you hear me now? Can you get me now? Can you get me now?